Acton.
Tara, go
yes,
ahead.
this is Tara Fredericks, West Acton. I'm concerned about the housing choice application. I emailed my concerns in, and hopefully I have misunderstood, and hopefully that you can assure me of what this process is for. I would like to know that it's for getting grants for maintenance on public housing units, and not for grants to try and sell us more housing or development or rezoning. There was some of that last year. I detailed that in my memo if anybody's interested in seeing the details, but I would like very much to understand. And also the housing choice grant application, the deadline has been extended according to the project manager at the state. So I would like that to be extended unless we can be assured at this point, so this isn't controversial. I personally don't think that we collectively, the town, should be doing anything that's controversial when we have remote meetings like this during a state of emergency. I would like very much to postpone this discussion until which time it's either non-controversial or there's an opportunity for in-person discussion.
Thank you, Tara. We'll get more information for you. Are there any other citizens' concerns?
There are not.
Okay.
I think I just want to mention all the hard work of staff over the last few weeks in preparing and addressing, and support from the board and from our town council in preparing to address the COVID-19 issue, and a lot of work yet to be done, but just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
We would all like to thank you and your professional town staff for all of the really good and solid work that they have done since the onset of this crisis, unprecedented crisis. Thank you very much.
So as I mentioned, the board is, the community has taken several measures to mitigate the impact of the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, in Acton. As of March 13th, at the end of business, we closed the Town Hall, the Human Services and Senior Center, the Acton Memorial Library, the West Acton Citizens Library, and the Recreation Building. All those buildings were closed to the public, and they are currently scheduled to reopen on April 7th to align with when the schools are set to reopen per the governor's orders most recently. The Board of Health last night voted to support the decision to close these public buildings. Over the last few weeks, we've formed a working group of staff to address needs and maintain government services. We've implemented social distancing and several other best practices throughout every part of the organization, from public works to public safety to permitting and everything in between. We have people working on a limited basis in this building and some of the other buildings, and a large portion of the workforce is working remotely that can. Our public works and public safety are still working in their positions. We've worked with the Board of Health to plan for and continue to navigate through the information that we're getting from the state and federal authorities. We've worked closely with the Acton-Boxborough School District and other organizations in our surrounding towns. We post daily updates on the website. We even also use the reverse 911 calling system just to make sure we hit every household in town, and we'll continue to use email updates and social media every day. The president declared a national state of emergency. The governor declared a state emergency in Massachusetts, and before you is a recommendation for you to consider declaring a state of emergency here in Acton. If you do consider it, there is a draft declaration that Town Council helped provide for you to review. And there's other matters to discuss that I know you will all be discussing related to the upcoming town meeting and election, and whether you want to ratify the decision to close public buildings in the way that the Board of Health did. Also, if you want to consider postponing or canceling all in-person meetings of any boards and committees other than the Selectmen and the Board of Health until further notice, allowing other time-sensitive and statutory requirements from other boards and committees, and allow them to meet virtually and remotely. So I look forward to working with you to identify these and other measures that you want to take to help this community continue to respond to the COVID-19 situation.
Thank you. Last night, all 5 of us did attend the Board of Health meeting, and tonight we said we would discuss declaring an emergency and the town election. So is there discussion?
Where shall we start?
Declaring the town,
The declaration of local emergency.
yeah.
Have we all read through it?
I can read it if that's helpful.
I can read it. Whereas COVID-19, a highly contagious and potentially life-threatening respiratory disease caused by the 2019 novel coronavirus, is rapidly becoming more prevalent throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the United States, and the rest of the world. And whereas on March 10th, 2020, the Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts issued a declaration of a state of emergency to respond to COVID-19, and whereas on March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization designated the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic health emergency, and whereas on March 13th, 2020, the President of the United States declared a national emergency concerning the COVID-19 outbreak, and whereas on March 15th, 2020, the Governor announced emergency actions to respond to evolving COVID-19 public health emergency affecting the Commonwealth, including prohibition on public gathering of 25 or more people and on-premise consumption of food or drink at bars and restaurants from March 17th, 2020 until April 6th, 2020. As well as suspension of elementary and secondary school educational operations from March 17th, 2020 until April 6th, 2020. And whereas the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Health of the Town of Acton, in consultation with the State Department of Public Health, has determined that COVID-19 presents a major disaster which poses an immediate threat to the health and safety of persons and property within and outside of Acton. And whereas the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Health of the Town of Acton have determined that immediate public action is needed in order to prevent or minimize the spread of COVID-19 by and among the people of Acton. And whereas it is critical to take additional steps to prepare for, respond to, and mitigate the spread of COVID-19 to protect the health and welfare of the people of Acton. And whereas declaring a state of emergency will facilitate and expedite the use of resources to protect persons from the impacts of COVID-19, including but not limited to emergency expenditures pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44, Section 31, and limitations on operating hours and access to public buildings. Now, therefore, pursuant to Section 4-1B of the Acton Town Charter, Chapter 44, Section 31 of the Massachusetts General Laws, and all other necessary and appropriate powers and authority, we, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Health of the Town of Acton, Massachusetts, hereby declare that as of March 10th, 2020, a state of emergency has existed and continues to exist in the town of Acton. This declaration of emergency shall remain in effect until further notice is given, pursuant to our judgment that the conditions leading to this declaration no longer exist. We, the undergoing, certify in multiple counterparts that the foregoing declaration was made at a meeting of the Acton Board of Selectmen and a meeting of the Acton Board of Health duly noticed pursuant to open meeting law as amended by the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law dated March 12, 2020. Is there a motion?
I move that the Board of Selectmen adopt the the declaration of local emergency.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion made and second. Any further discussion? John?
Just the fact that the Board of Health is also shown and listed on here, and just to make sure that there's a recognition that it would be a two-part process, or just so that we're all clear. Did I explain that?
So if I may, Madam Chair, I'll jump in here. Nina Pickering Cook from Town Council's office. We've drafted up the declaration of local emergency. I want to make a couple of points and I'll get to John's. First is we really see this as a belt and suspenders approach. This is not required in order to take any of the emergency actions that the town has taken to date. Those are likely all covered statutorily by the governor's declaration of an emergency. We have not identified any particular law that requires the declaration of a local emergency if there is a state emergency already declared and in place. However, certainly there is no harm in declaring a local one. It adds to any explanation of the actions taken that kind of at every level we've acknowledged this affects the town of Acton. So this is not a necessary prerequisite to any actions that you would all take, but rather is just a buttress to the governor's actions that have in declaring the state of emergency. So I don't want anyone to think that this somehow opens the town up for eligibility of recovery funds or anything like that. At this point, we don't see that as being the case. That is why you will see there's towns are all over the map on this. We have some towns that we've discussed this with who've chosen not to declare a local emergency, and some towns who have gone ahead and done it. So there is a divergence amongst local governments as far as whether they think this is necessary or not. But in discussing with John earlier today, we certainly didn't see any harm in doing that. This is not as if it's going to elicit panic with the public. I mean, there's already a good deal of coverage of the state of emergency out there, and I don't think this would heighten that at all. With respect to John's point, you do have the authority as a Board of Selectmen to declare a local emergency without the Board of Health. The Board of Health likewise has the ability to declare public health emergencies. Where this is a public health crisis, it seems prudent to have that be a combined declaration or combined task, just so it does cover all of the statutory authorities of both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Health. It does not need to be done at the same time. I understand from John they are meeting later this week on Thursday, I believe, and they can take this up at that point. And the declaration is, at this point, being made, I believe, as of March 10th, so it would kind of be retroactive to the date of the governor's declaration. And the only discussion point beyond whether you want to discuss whether it's necessary or not is how long to have the declaration in place. We drafted it as just until further notice is given. That mirrors the language that's used in the state declaration of emergency. If the town wanted to, you could make it coterminous with the state of emergency declared by the governor, or just leave it as is. That is certainly up to you.
Peter?
The Board of Health, as I understood it last night, declared a public health emergency in Acton at their meeting last night. And as I mentioned at the meeting, I do think it is important, particularly in times of crisis, to ensure that the legally authorized entities are sanctioning the steps that are taken. I'm not sure whether the governor's emergency declaration requires that all public buildings be closed or all playgrounds be closed. Maybe it does. But in my view, it's the Board of Selectmen that has the ultimate legal authority and responsibility as the chief elected officials in the town of Acton to make those decisions. It's not entrusted in the town manager. I have no problem with the decisions that have been made, but this is a very important point in my view. I was looking at, and I think the Board of Health was looking at, if you want to pull it up, Section 104 of Chapter 111, which is generally the public health statutes.
Right.
It says if a disease dangerous to the public health exists in a town, the Selectmen and Board of Health shall use all possible care to prevent the spread of the infection and may give public notice of infected places by such means as in their judgment may be most effectual. So that's what I was looking at as a joint declaration by both the Board of Health and the Selectmen to declare the emergency. So I would recommend that we recite that statute as well. But there's no case law on it, but it's pretty clear.
No, if I could respond to that, Peter, I certainly agree that the Board of Selectmen, that chapter and section requires combined action from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Health. My point was a little bit different than that. I believe that the Board of Health and the Board of Selectmen have that statutory authority without declaring a local state of emergency. That's my only point. I do believe that the actions have to be taken by the Board of Health and the Board of Selectmen in certain cases when it comes to closing down public gathering places like playgrounds. Absolutely. You don't need this piece of paper in order to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I think it is an important, I think it's an important document to set the leadership of the town that the Board of Selectmen considers this an emergency, and people ought to pay attention to it and follow the rules, so.
I don't disagree at all. I just wanted to make sure the legalities of it, I was being clear about the legalities of it.
Okay, any further discussion? Motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Well, I'm sorry, I was just going to suggest that we add on the second page where it's talking about now, therefore, pursuant to the Charter, Chapter 44, Section 31, and
Chapter 111.
Chapter 111, Section 104.
104?
Yeah.
Okay.
Other than that, I'm fine with it.
So we can make that change in this declaration as long as you take a vote as amended with Peter's recommendation, then Joan can just sign that declaration when we make that change tomorrow.
Okay, so
John?
I will alter my motion that we accept the declaration of local emergency as amended.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. I did notice today that the salad bar at Donlands was closed after last night's meeting.
So do we have I wanted to raise a couple of other points on this topic, so I don't know if the town manager has additional things you want to talk about, or?
Just the ones I mentioned earlier, the town meeting and the election and so forth, but.
You also want us to, at the bottom of your letter of today, the 3 bullets, considering the decision of closing public buildings and public playgrounds and postponing in-person board meetings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shall we move to ratify?
It's something I'd ask you to consider.
Yeah, well, I think we ought to deal with that first. I mean,
Yeah, the following additional items. Consider ratifying the decision to close public buildings and public playgrounds. Consider postponing or canceling in-person board and committee meetings other than the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health until further notice. Boards with time-sensitive or statutory deadlines may consider meeting remotely and virtually. Consider postponing the scheduled annual town meeting currently planned for April 6th and discuss options as it relates to the March 31st town election and special state election. Shall we consider closing the public buildings and public playgrounds?
yeah, go ahead.
David?
I move that we ratify that decision by the town manager.
Is there a second?
Second.
Dean seconds.
Just a question, and how long would they be closed for?
Until further notice?
We are continuing to get input from the state Department of Public Health and the governor's office on how they're handling the buildings across the Commonwealth. Playgrounds, I certainly would say until further notice. Buildings, I think we need to continue to evaluate, and I can certainly bring back potential further considerations for the board. But right now, we're planning to reopen on April 7th when the schools are planning to reopen according to the, well, I don't know if our schools are planning to reopen, but that's what the governor's most recent direction was. They were to be closed until that date, and we haven't received further direction.
So then we would talk about it until further notice for
Until,
the closing of public buildings and public playgrounds.
David?
I think we might want to leave it to the town manager's discretion, and I can amend my motion to say that we ratify the town manager's decision to close public buildings and playgrounds, and they can reopen at the town manager's discretion, based on the situation at the state level.
Discussion? Dean?
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded.
Yeah, again, I would rather just leave it at April 7th. I think we've got to have a process here for making these decisions. I'm going to recommend that the board meet more frequently. I've talked to John about that. We could meet virtually. Maybe John make decisions in consultation with the chair and the vice chair, and approve those decisions. I feel more comfortable with the selectmen being involved in these decisions rather than just putting it in the hands of the town manager. Not that I don't have all the confidence in the world in the town manager, but again, I think it's important that since we're the legal entity that's authorized to make these decisions, that we be overseeing them and involved in them. So I would be more comfortable with leaving it at April 7th, and we can change that, as we go along. We could. There may be other things that might come up. Again, as Nina says, the ground is moving under our feet here. But before any further actions like that are taken, I would recommend that the town manager consult with the chair and the vice chair and get approval for a course moving forward.
Okay, David?
Yeah, I would be okay with consulting with the chair and vice chair. My concern about, and I'm also happy to meet more frequently if that makes sense. But I would be concerned if we just left it in the hands of just the board, because I think the response times are going to need to be more rapid than, unless we are meeting very frequently. For example, I don't expect the situation to be resolved by the end of the first week in April. fact, I suspect that it'll be getting worse through sometime in May. And so if, 2 days before April 7th, the governor changes the recommendations, we have to be prepared to act within the 2-day thing. And of course, we can have an emergency meeting, and if that's what we want to do, that's fine. But I think that I'm happy to amend my motion again to say consulting with the chair and vice chair, and then maybe the chair and vice chair can call an emergency meeting should they want input from the whole board.
So it would be through April 7th, subject to an extension upon
Consultation.
upon consultation by the town manager with the chair and the vice chair of the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, I would prefer we not put a closing date on it and have it be until further notice from the town manager after consulting with the chair and vice chair. And then the chair and vice chair could call, an emergency meeting of the entire board should they feel that that's necessary.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. There are a lot of towns that are calling emergency meetings. It certainly fits within the definition of emergency, but, and if we need to do that, I'm all in favor of that. And we can ratify whatever decisions the chair and vice chair would make with the town manager going forward.
So your motion would be?
I would move we ratify the decision to close public buildings and playgrounds until such time that until we further notice, and the notice would come from the town manager after consulting with the chair and vice chair of the Board of Selectmen.
Is there a second?
Second.
Dean seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay. Consider postponing or canceling in-person board and committee meetings other than the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health until further notice. Discussion? David?
So I expect this situation to be going on for some months, maybe even through the summer. And I think that's a long time to hold off the other meetings. I don't mind postponing all meetings except for the Board of Health and Board of Selectmen until we can work out easy to use virtual meeting arrangements. I mean, meetings that are 100% virtual and don't need the audio in the room and things like that. Very easy to do. Businesses do them all the time. I have my own ID at work. I can make a virtual meeting in seconds from anywhere on the planet. And all we need to do is instruct the chairs on how to do that. And then business could proceed. I mean, I don't mind holding off business for a month or something, but I think by, after a month, we should have a plan to have virtual meetings. Just my opinion.
Peter?
Yeah, I had a question about the governor's declaration on this. What did he do about boards of planning boards who have time-sensitive decision-making?
So there has been no action yet. We've been pushing through the MMA as well as the governor's legal counsel legislation to deal with permitting timelines akin to the 2012 Permit Extension Act. As many people may remember, it just basically told all permitting timelines, all appeal timelines for 2 years. That was due to the financial crisis when builders and developers and purchasers of housing were losing financing, and so they couldn't move projects forward. This is very different and likely much more specific as far as just the inability to move things forward. So we expect that legislation to come down in the next couple of weeks. We don't know when. Of course, time periods are running during that time. So our recommendation, until that permitting legislation and that tolling legislation gets put into place and in effect, is that those boards and committees keep meeting to the extent possible. They can and should, however, meet remotely and virtually if two conditions are met. If the members of the boards that this applies to, which really means only those kind of quasi-judicial boards of CONSCOM, ZBA, Planning Board, and arguably the HDC as well if they have applications pending in front of them that have timelines. So it's really only those kind of land use boards that this applies to. So the first condition I would say is if those members are able to participate remotely, meaning the Board of Selectmen has adopted that for the town and allowed them to do so, as well as technologically they can do so individually. And the second criteria would be that the town has developed some technological mechanism for the public to participate virtually as well. And again, when I say participate, I don't mean actually insert themselves and be involved in these meetings, but they do need to be able to watch them and hear the proceedings. If, for instance, it's a ZBA meeting that is a public hearing, which is different than a public meeting, then the public does need to be able to actually participate, meaning interact with the board or committee, as well as have access to the materials that are being distributed for that particular board or committee meeting. So it is possible, logistically and technologically possible to do all of that. It certainly makes things more complicated. It certainly makes things more complicated for members of those boards and committees, and it makes things more complicated for members of the public that may not be comfortable interacting virtually with the planning board, you know, as they're reviewing plans and the like. That is the playing field we're on right now. Again, I expect that playing field to change. Once a tolling legislation is in place, then there is more of a policy discussion as opposed to a logistical discussion about whether or not you do want to just cancel all of those meetings and put all of those boards and committees on hold. You know, there are policy arguments on both sides of that as far as delaying economic growth and development versus public participation in technological challenges. So as of right now, I would say they should have the ability to continue to meet those in addition to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Health, and the school committee, which of course you don't have authority over, but the school committee is certainly going to, I assume, going to continue to meet as well. In addition to what I would call those three essential boards, I would also have the permitting boards continue to meet.
Virtually.
Virtually, however they're comfortable meeting. I mean, if there are 2 or 3 people who would like to be in a room similar to this setup, and then 2 or 3 people who want to be remote, you know, that's fine as well. I think if you're going to allow them to continue to meet, you do need to give the authority for them to meet virtually. The governor has certainly expanded the open meeting law to allow that. And then the town IT folks will have to help those boards and committees figure out how to do that.
So the second sentence, boards with time-sensitive or statutory deadlines may consider meeting remotely and virtually.
Yeah, so those are the boards we're talking about, the ZBA, the CONSCOM, the Planning Board, and the HDC. I think in addition to Board of Health and Board of Selectmen, those are the only boards and committees that I would be worried about continuing to meet.
John?
For Nina, one of my liaison boards, the Cable Advisory Committee, is in the middle of licensing renegotiations with Comcast and Verizon. they do need to meet.
Sure.
May they meet under the guidelines we just talked about?
I don't have the guidelines in front of me, but it sounds like it's limited to those with statutory timelines or requirements, and I don't think the cable access would fall within that, but that could be expanded to be, contractual requirements as well. That language that Joan read could be expanded to include contractual obligations.
Okay. So we would say boards with time-sensitive statutory or contractual deadlines?
Yeah, obligations, I would say, instead of deadlines. Obligations is a little broader. Does that make sense to you, John?
Yes.
And John?
Just writing it.
No? Yes?
So boards with time-sensitive statutory or contractual obligations may consider. Good.
I'm comfortable with that, but it's
Yeah,
your
I mean,
decision.
maybe you can get us an analysis of the governor's relief on this. I'm not very clear on what he said about these
About the
hearings.
open meeting law?
These hearings. No, this is, you're right, yeah.
Sure, so all he's done, he's taken a piecemeal approach, right? So all he's done is, he's drafted an order expanding or loosening the restrictions around the open meeting law, and he's proposed legislation that has not yet passed with respect to the timing of town meeting and some financial, municipal finance timing issues. That has not passed yet. The open meeting law component doesn't get into this permitting issue. So the open meeting law component, all it says is, typically there are a lot of requirements on remote participation. You need to have a quorum in the room, physically present. There needs to be a reason given for remote participation, and a number of other requirements. What they've done is say, okay, all of those requirements on remote participation are null and void for the time being. You can all remotely participate. The chair doesn't need to be physically in the room. No one needs to physically be present in the room. But they haven't said anything about particular boards and committees, and they haven't said anything yet about permit tolling. So that's just TBD at this point. All of they've done is loosened the restrictions around remote participation.
For all boards, including hearings as well as
Correct.
regular
The only
meetings.
requirements on that is
Okay.
if it is, they still need to be available to the public if it's an open meeting, not executive session, meaning the public need to be able to either see and hear or just hear. And if it is a public hearing, the public needs to be able to have a mechanism to participate.
Okay.
And that's where we point to the IT folks on figuring out how to provide that technology. If the governor, the order has said, if you cannot figure out a way that the public can participate, if it is a public hearing for permitting purposes, then you should not hold that hearing virtually. And you should cancel the hearing because it's going to be more than 10 people.
Okay, I've been using Zoom with my family, and it's worked great. And it's a really amazing product. I think there were some issues last night. It seemed to work okay, but there were certainly some issues in the room. My wife reported that it was impossible to hear anybody, even the people who are in the room, let alone the people who were calling in. That's not unusual, actually. We have sound problems with regular meetings that are just broadcast. But so I suppose each board, how would that work? Each board would decide, are we going to meet in person and allow people to come in? I can't imagine us having a dangerous dog hearing virtually, frankly.
Yep, there are going to be certain decisions made as far as what makes sense to, and what needs to be actually conducted now, and what makes sense to do virtually from a technological point of view. And I agree, there are certain things that are being triaged at this point, kind of at all levels of the government, that won't necessarily be dealt with because they're just impractical to deal with at this point.
Are there public comments?
Yes, we do have one. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Tara, and I wanted to speak about the declaration of emergency, and I didn't get a chance before the vote, and because I wanted to make a couple of comments. First of all, I'd like to remind people, because the whereas said that the governor, something about the governor amending laws. I don't believe the governor can amend laws, even in a state of emergency, so I would check on that. The other thing is that I'd like to understand, do these, when Nina had said the majority of anything you need to do is covered by the state declaration of emergency, I'd like to understand if it gives the town any extra powers. I'd also like to understand whether any of these declarations of emergencies negate due process, so it's not martial law, because the cities are not invoking any kind of martial law. They're requesting people to stay in place, and I don't believe, and then relative to my comment to what you're saying right now, I feel like when you're in person, see, I was not ignored, but you didn't ask me to speak during that vote, or before that vote. What happens, it's so much easier for people to ignore the public when they're not standing right there. That if they're online and they're pressing *9 and they're being ignored, then the public isn't able to comment. And I don't feel like the state of emergency is causing us such disruption in our lives, life-threatening disruption, that keeping the timeline the same for the developers is such a disadvantage to the public. I don't think that this is business as usual in any way, shape, or form. And economic growth, there's a lot more than economic growth than residential growth, which ends up costing the towns. And so I don't feel like economic growth and, jobs and stuff like that are as important as protecting ourselves from the onslaught of the effects of a major emergency. And so I feel like the last thing we want to do is encourage any builders, developers to continue on a timeline that is a business as usual situation. I feel like we got to stop, and we've got to take care of our families, and we got to stop doing business in terms of permitting. And I hope that the legislature does not vote to keep the timeline as is, that they've got to give us some relief. It's too hard for us to review these projects in time, especially when we don't even get it. You get a declaration of emergency, and the first I even heard about it was at the meeting, and thank you very much for reading it, but we didn't see a copy of it ahead of time. So a lot of this stuff, it's important for us to see that papers are being passed around the table, and when we aren't in person like that, it's a great disadvantage. And so I hope that you protect the town first, as opposed to the developers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joan, do you want me to respond to any of them? Or let me clarify, Joan, I would like to respond to some of them.
Okay.
So if I may, Tara, thank you for your comments. With respect to commenting during public meetings, that is typically part of the tradition here in Acton, that they take public comment when there is some. However, under the open meeting law, there is no requirement to take public comment unless it is a public hearing, such as a permitting hearing. The declaration of local emergency, as I tried to make clear, does not give the town government any additional powers or authority to declare any sort of martial law. It does not broaden the authority than what they otherwise have under state statute already. And then with respect to the concerns as far as keeping the development timelines, to be clear, I don't want it to be confused. When we're talking about the tolling legislation that we are championing through the Governor's Legal Counsel on behalf of our town clients, it is to put a tolling legislation in place in order to allow the towns essentially not to meet, in order to allow the towns to press pause on these projects. What we are worried about is that many of those boards and committees have timelines that run as soon as developers and other people file applications. If action is not taken by those boards within a certain amount of time, those applications are constructively approved. The concern is that our boards and committees, if not able to meet, won't be able to discuss and decide those applications if within that timeline, and therefore have these applications just be constructively approved without the appropriate oversight. What we're looking for is the governor's office and the legislature to put in place some legislation that relieves those timelines so that the board can press pause and allow these boards and committees effectively not to take up any of these applications that are currently pending without risking having them be constructively approved. Is that clear to the board?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we're talking about postponing or canceling in-person board and committee meetings other than the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health until further notice. Boards with time-sensitive or statutory deadlines, including contractual obligations, may consider meeting remotely and virtually. David?
I would propose that until further notice, we have, until the town can supply a mechanism for virtual meetings. And then the rest of it is okay by me. I think it's important that we have a mechanism going forward that if a board or committee wants to meet virtually, that they can meet virtually.
Okay.
Whether it's the Cable Advisory Committee or one of the statutory boards.
And the Finance Committee would fit in with that as well. Am I correct?
Yes, that depends. The urgency of the meeting, of course, depends somewhat on what you do with town meeting, and which is an issue you'll be taking up. But yes, I understand David's amendment to be any and all boards could meet virtually as long as as soon as the town confirms that it has the capability to provide that as legally required.
Peter?
Okay, so to play out how this is going to work, so meet virtually means all board members call in as well as public, I guess, right? Is that?
That is at one end of the extreme.
Okay.
Depending on what you all decide. Certain board or committee members, they could have one or two people at town hall if you want to authorize that, or you can say, no, we're most comfortable with having everyone meet virtually. I mean, the law is not governing beyond the prohibition on gatherings over 10 people. The law is not governing who and how many people meet for a public meeting at this point. That is for you all as the wardens of these public spaces to determine.
Okay, I mean, the way this reads now, is I'm reading it, the boards with time-sensitive contractual or statutory deadlines may consider meeting remotely and virtually. That would mean that they can't meet in person. So I think we need to be clear about this. David is suggesting we not postpone all other boards. If we're not going to postpone them, we're going to allow them to meet virtually. We ought to make it mandatory that if you meet, it be a virtual meeting, I think. And I don't know about the other boards, if we require them to do it virtually or we leave it up to the chair to decide. I mean, some of these ZBA hearings get pretty contentious. A lot of neighbors show up. Can you hold that virtually, realistically?
No, let's go to John.
I'm sorry. I just have a quick thing. We normally, when we provide for board and committee meetings, it's the extent of work we have to do is make sure there's a space available, and in some cases provide staff to take minutes or just to help through the process. In the current environment, holding a public meeting is a much larger process. Our team has worked several hours each day to set these two meetings up the last two nights, and it certainly will take less time every time we do it, but it is a consideration that I think we need some more time. What I'd ask is that we take at least a week of no other meetings except for those listed, just so we can, because the IT group, we need to be doing a lot of other things right now. So unless there's urgent or time-sensitive matters, I'd really like to allow for just a minimum amount of required meetings until it's much easier to orchestrate, which may be soon, but I think at least a week or so would be helpful, if not longer.
What is the date from tonight, March 17th, March 24th? So if we add may consider meeting remotely and virtually after March 24th?
May I?
I just want to be clear with John.
I wanted to be clear that in my amendment, I said until such time as the town can supply a mechanism for virtual meetings. And I would hate to put a deadline on it, frankly, that, you know, just to give them 1 week, I think is a little unfair because there are a few things that'll need to be done. So I would propose we leave the language in that that would be my preference, is to say until such time as the town can supply a virtual meeting mechanism.
So can you read your amendment? Is that just the first sentence you're amending?
In my amendment, I said, consider postponing or canceling in-person board and committee meetings other than the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health until such time as the town can supply a virtual meeting mechanism. Boards with time-sensitive statutory deadlines or other obligations, I think was the wording, may consider meeting remotely and virtually. And to answer your question, I think all meetings should be virtual because there's always the possibility of more than 10 members of the public showing up. And then we're in violation of the guidelines for larger gatherings. And if a hearing is not doable, then we just have to cross our fingers that the legislature passes a mechanism such that we can postpone permit hearings. I do think that in a hearing mechanism, someone is going to need to moderate the meeting other than the chair. In other words, the chair does the main moderation of the meeting, but someone's going to need to be there to watch the virtual hand raising and things like that. I think the chair can do everything in the case of a normal meeting because it's not that onerous, but where, you know, if we were to do a big ZBA hearing, you're going to need someone to moderate. And the meeting will be easier too if it's 100% virtual. If there's no presence in this room, it's easier to do.
So again, your motion would be after the word until, strike out further notice until such time as the town can supply virtual. Yes. Until such time as the town can supply virtual mechanism. A mechanism for virtual meetings.
Okay, any further discussion on that? John, are you comfortable with that?
I appreciate the intent of the motion, but I think technically we can do that. I mean, the way it's worded, we're able to provide the service, and we are. I think it's just too onerous, I think, is my point. So I would appreciate a little more clarity, just so as we talk to other boards and committees, we can explain that, you know, because they could say, well, you just did 2 nights in a row, why can't you do ours? So that's my only concern.
Then in that case, you know, maybe we should just, until our next meeting, just leave it the way it was until further notice. And And we can come back and revisit this once the mechanisms have been looked into and change the recommendation.
Okay. So leave it alone until further notice. So we leave it alone until further notice, period, and then it would pick up boards with time-sensitive, or statutory and contractual obligations may consider meeting remotely and virtually.
Nina?
I was just going to offer some alternate language as well, instead of kicking it back to you again for another meeting before that can happen, is you can say something along the lines of until a time deemed prudent by the town manager, or until a time when town resources allow it as determined by the town manager, so that John is the one who is in touch with staff and knows the capabilities of the staff and technological resources, that you can just delegate that decision to him. I don't think that necessarily, unlike Peter's point with the use of public spaces and gathering at public spaces, I don't think that is a determination that is statutorily necessarily left to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen can delegate to John when those resources are available, where he is the manager in charge of those resources.
Okay.
You know, again, I have to, the canceling public meetings, which are set by statute, again, I think is something that the selectmen ought to control. And so I would suggest that rather than just delegating it to John, it be until the chair, the vice chair, in consultation with the town manager, determine otherwise.
Nina?
If I may, my only query on that is, I don't see legally a difference between, I practically see a difference with your kind of modified approach, Peter, but legally I don't see a difference because it is still not an action of the board. The board, of course, has some involvement, but I think John always involves the chair in most decisions anyways, so it's still essentially just John acting in that case, as opposed to if you want the board to act, then it should be a quorum of the board taking a vote to act. Otherwise, legally, there's no impact of John consulting the chair and the vice chair. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I would then not, I mean, it does. I agree with you 100% that it's, you know, any action by the board has to be taken by a vote. On something like this, canceling all meetings except for those that are required by statute or hearing deadlines or whatever, I think the board should determine that. I mean, we can call an emergency meeting. It's not the kind of thing that's going to need an emergency. I mean, we you know, it's not going to be like tomorrow we're going to say, okay, boards are going to start meeting again. I think the Board of Selectmen should understand how that's working, what's going on, what problems are coming up, and make a determination as a select board about whether we should cancel all town committee meetings.
I agree with you, Peter. How would you structure it here so it's workable?
I guess I would say until further vote of the Board of Selectmen.
Until further order of the Board of Selectmen?
Yeah, vote or order or whatever.
We don't presently vote on when the planning board meets or how often they meet.
each committee pretty much sets its own schedule. The planning board meetings are set up statutorily, but if we're going to say no committee meetings in any committee in town, I think that should be a selectman's decision. I mean, you may disagree with me. That's just the way I feel about it. I think that's a decision that should be left up to the chief elected officials in town.
So can I read between the lines there, Peter? And so you're suggesting that until in the first sentence, until the further vote by the Board of Selectmen, and then maybe a second says we ask the town manager to come up with a mechanism so that all committees can meet virtually, and then we'll consider that at a future meeting?
So we've amended this to say right. What did we do with virtual? We're saying that the non-time sensitive boards, until further notice, which would be when we'd have the ability. Yeah, I would say, yeah. I mean, you know, again, I'm going to suggest that we meet more often. If we meet next Monday, the manager could come to us and say, okay, we've got all this virtual gizmos in effect, and we're ready to go, and let's start well, I recommend that we start all committee meetings again, and we could vote to do that.
So instead of saying until further notice, until further decision of the Board of Selectmen,
That's my recommendation.
would that be okay, David?
Yes, and then on the side, I don't care whether we do it in part of the motion or just a sense of the board, ask the town manager to come up with a virtual mechanism such that all boards and committees can meet. And then at a future vote, we would ask the committees to use that new mechanism. So until we have such a mechanism, all meetings are suspended.
Yeah.
And at a future meeting, we would vote, assuming that we have a mechanism in place.
Well, we do have a mechanism in place, right?
We don't have one that right now is scaled to every board and committee.
Okay. But do we need to have all boards and committees meet?
My opinion is yes, because I believe we're going to be in this state for 4 or 5 months. I mean, I expect that the situation will be getting worse through May and then start to get better. So maybe by the end of the summer, if we're lucky, everybody can come out.
John?
I think to simplify, I think in the spirit of Selectman Berry's, what I think his motion is intending is, if you just say there shall be no more board and committee meetings other than the Selectmen and the Board of Health until the Board of Selectmen meet to reopen boards and committee meetings or something to that effect. Just so if you want to make that decision next week, I'm not sure that we'll have it all figured out by next week, but if you want to take another week after that, I can continue to keep you updated. But what I'm asking for is for our staff to have an opportunity to work on the several other things that I need them to work on. In the exception of a very time-sensitive or statutory required action of another board, we can continue to do what they've done. But from what is going on out in the community, in the world, I think the boards that, other than the school committee, I think the Board of Health and the Selectmen are probably the only ones that need to meet this week. And I would ask for as much time as you're willing to give me to have a time to figure out how we'd handle other boards and committees.
All right, so let's simplify the motion and say until next week.
John's wording said until further decision by the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah.
And I think we should just have the first sentence. And then that's really simple. And then whenever the town is ready to move forward, we can change our minds.
Nina?
Joan, Madam Chair, I don't want to complicate this further, but there needs to be a separate authorization at this point for permit granting boards and committees just because there is no special legislation in place yet. I am not aware of any pending applications with timelines coming due that have not already been extended, but I also have not been in touch with all of the staff for those boards and committees, so there could be a timeline that's running next week at the planning board that I'm not aware of, so I'm not comfortable canceling those permit granting boards and committees without further consultation of the staff, that they can wait 2 weeks until folks are ready to kind of reopen the virtual town hall. And I think originally John's order intended to accept out those boards. I wish we had legislation now so we could just deal with all the boards and committees in toto, but at this point, I do think there needs to be a carve out for those permit granting boards and committees.
So you're just recommending we keep the second sentence in, I guess?
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Does that work for you, John?
Second sentence, as modified with contractual obligations. Yes, that works for me, but what's the first sentence?
I don't have any sentences in front of me, so I can't help on that.
The first,
Until further notice, consider postponing. We would vote to postpone or cancel in-person board and committee meetings other than the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Health until further notice.
Until further decision by the
Board of Selectmen.
By the Board of Selectmen.
That's what we decided. I think.
Okay.
So I think what it would read is, the Board of Selectmen is, has decided to postpone and cancel in-person board and committee meetings other than the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health until further decision by the Board of Selectmen. A little choppy, but I think that's what we agreed to. And then the second sentence would be boards with time-sensitive, statutory or contractual obligations may consider meeting remotely and virtually. All good?
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, third bullet. Town meeting currently planned for April 6th and discuss options as it relates to the March 31st town election and special state election. Do we know anything about the special state election?
It's to fill Representative Benson's seat, and it's one of a handful that are occurring across the Commonwealth on that day. And we have heard nothing about it being changed at this point. We have been informed that they'll give us more absentee ballots if we need them.
I understand from a Boston Herald article that I saw that there are 4 special elections, 2 in the House and 2 in the Senate, to fill vacant seats. I don't know when they are. I just know that the Middlesex 37th is on for March 31st, which includes Acton precincts 3, 4, and 5. And that is nothing I think we can specifically control. That's a Secretary Galvin decision.
Nina?
Correct. You have no mechanism as the Board of Selectmen to postpone either a local or a special state election. The mechanism that you do have, again, this is one of those areas where legislation is circling around the general court and the governor's office right now, but has not yet come down. The legal option you do have is to seek a court order enjoining the holding of the election on that date. That is something that has been done in the past for weather emergencies in other towns, and then a number of towns have taken that action this week. I know of a whole handful of our towns are considering doing that at the end of this week. Wellesley did it yesterday, and that is the only mechanism to postpone that election. We would do that certainly in consultation with the Secretary of State's office.
Did Wellesley cancel their town election?
Yes.
Okay, and that's the 31st?
I believe their election was going to be this week.
Okay.
They did it the day before the election.
You can't get a court order to postpone a state election, can you?
I believe you can. You
Really?
would have to give notice to the Secretary of State, and they could certainly come in and oppose that. But
Because there's 7 towns that are going to
Right.
be holding the election.
at this point, I understand from John's consultation with the other towns that they're discussing a joint action
To postpone
to postpone the March 31st election.
the 37th.
Special state.
37th Middlesex,
Yeah.
Yeah, can I
Yes.
just ask what the authority of court has to delay an election?
I can, it's just the general equities, the power to enjoin actions. So that is, it has been used before. I've never used it for Acton. We've used it for Concord and Lexington in the past. And it is including going to Ralph Gantz's doorstep and having him sign an order on the doorstep. So it has been done before, and there is no statutory site. It is just the court's equitable powers.
So it would go right to the SJC?
No, I apologize. We had used Chief Justice Gantz before he was on the SJC, and that was because he was a resident of Lexington, and it
So you went to
required
his
in that
doorstep,
case a
yeah.
local judge to.
Who would be the defendant in such an action?
There is not. It is just in Ray, town of Acton.
So we would delay the town election until such time as
Yes, you would
It's
seek
safe?
you would seek to postpone the election until a later date. I don't know, you can draft it as a date certain, or you can draft it as a date later to be called by the Board of Selectmen.
Would that be, I guess there were 2 options. We could go to court and ask the judge to do that. You seem to indicate you were preparing like orders for other towns you represent.
Correct.
And review them all together?
Yes, they would be different, they would be separate complaints. We have both Concord and Winchester likewise have elections on March 31st. So we would have 3 separate complaints that would be virtually identical. They're already drafted, and then we would send someone to the court to the emergency session in Woburn and present those 3 motions all at once.
Okay, and that's a better course than the so-called governor's bill.
Yeah, so what John is referring to as the governor's bill is essentially a home rule authorization or home rule legislation without going through town meeting. It is a request directly to the governor's office to have the governor pass legislation that affects only the town of Acton. Some towns are pursuing that route as well. We don't think, meaning the municipal law group at A&K, don't think that that's really a fruitful approach at this point when we have the clock ticking for some of our towns like Acton, where with an election coming up and the need to post for that election, where there is a whole bunch of legislation already up on Beacon Hill being circulated for a global fix for all cities and towns, providing more flexibility about postponing elections. I would much rather have the legislature focused on that global fix. And I think there's much more likely to be traction on that global fix than there is to spend time and effort trying to get the governor's attention for an individual bill for Acton. If we want to go the individual route, the much more effective and cost sensitive and time sensitive approach would be that court order route.
Right, so that's
So
the way
we're proceeding, we would be proceeding on both paths right now, right? We're waiting for the legislation, and we're pushing the legislation that would just allow you as the Board of Selectmen to postpone the town election like you can postpone town meeting, which you will talk about shortly. You don't have those same powers when it comes to elections. This legislation that is being discussed on Beacon Hill right now would allow you that flexibility. So we're pursuing that avenue through, various lobbying angles. But on the other hand, until that comes through, we would want to have the court order avenue at the ready.
Okay, so with discussion for us then to be whether we want to postpone the March 31 town election.
Authorize council to
Yes.
work with other towns. Well, to postpone, yeah. I mean, would that'd be two pieces that'd be two complaints, wouldn't it? The town election and the state election.
Yes, so it would be an individual town election complaint, and then hopefully a consolidated complaint for all the towns affected by the special state election. These are very simple pleadings.
Yeah.
These are easy to do.
Follow this route and postpone the election, and we postpone town meeting, we have to have something that deals with the fiscal year. So we would postpone it until June?
Yeah, so at this point, with the legislation as it currently is enacted, you can delay town meeting to adjourn no later than June 30th, and you need to have, that meeting needs to adjourn in order for your operational budget to become effective for July 1. That means you can delay the calling of town meeting, but you want to allow enough time before June 30th to have at least 1 or 2 nights of town meeting, so you can make sure you get all your business in and can close it by June 30th. Now, that is as the law currently stands. The legislation that was proposed by the governor that is currently being discussed on Beacon Hill that we expect to pass in some form this week would allow a number of things to happen. You could delay the calling of town meeting beyond June 30th. And like the powers that cities have, the towns would have the power or the authority to continue funding each month at the same level as essentially the previous month. You could have a month-by-month appropriation essentially until a budget can be approved at town meeting.
My concern is right now, the town doesn't seem to be sick, but everything leads you to believe that it's going to get worse. So the longer we delay, the more likely we are to be in a situation where we'd want to postpone it again or do something that doesn't create more of a situation.
Well, as we are now, the governor's gathering prohibition would include town meeting, and I can't imagine it's going to be lifted by April 6th, though April 6th is just not going to happen. It would seem, I think our wisest course is for the board to be, proactive this evening, recognize that appropriations under the current law don't need to be approved until June 30th, not to post the warrant and delay town meeting, which would give us the flexibility as we watch it in the weeks ahead, when it would be perhaps the best time, not the greatest time, to hold town meeting, and maybe we will get a little additional flexibility if these laws pass later this week, where we can go out into the summer or into the fall, and the the mechanism for funding would be there because we could continue to fund our operations at the current year's level. But, April 6th would be off. That's just, I don't see that happening. And so, maybe if we could focus on Nina's memorandum of earlier this afternoon, and I would like to, direct, the attention to points 2 and 3, which are, I think, basically, it was emailed to us this afternoon. Yeah, I can just read what item 2 is: delay posting of town meeting to create and post election warrant, or delay posting of town meeting and create and post separate election warrant. A would be a town meeting. BOS can delay the posting of a town meeting pursuant to Chapter 39, Section 9, so long as it is adjourned by June 30th, meaning it must be called for a date prior to then if the town expects more than one night. Therefore, the BOS can vote to delay the posting until a date when the town has a better sense of when the social distancing prohibitions are lifted and the threat of COVID-19 has waned to a safe level. I think that the Section 9 option gives us the most flexibility and the better menu of options. And then with respect to the town election, there is currently no authority to postpone or delay the local or state special election schedule for March 31. This means if the BOS decides to delay the posting of the town meeting warrant, a separate warrant would need to be posted announcing only the election. So, and then I guess the town would need to take the necessary steps as above, seek an emergency court order if no special legislation is coming by Friday. And that would be for the town election. And then, as Nina suggests, if the other towns in the 37th Middlesex District want to coordinate together on a combined motion to postpone the state rep election.
So we would have the town election as presently scheduled?
No. We would seek, well, yeah, okay, I could see that. Okay, what point 3 would be with respect to the town meeting is what I just read as option 2. The town election, we would seek an immediate court order without posting any election warrant. That would be the course that I would suggest. So basically, the option 2A and combined with 3B, seek the immediate court order without posting any election warrant.
Could we do these two separately with the town meeting first?
Yeah, that's fine. I was just laying because.
Yes, that's fine. So I would just propose that we deal with the town meeting first.
That's
and then
fair.
Deal with the election.
Yeah. So.
And I would completely support 2A. Basically delaying the posting of this, the warrant, and then we would set a date in the future, maybe June 1st or June 15th, both of which are Mondays, something like that.
Wait and see.
Are you talking about setting a date now? Or I would suggest maybe we just postpone it until we decide what the date should be. I don't know if
that's what Section 9 gives us, that flexibility.
Rather than setting a firm date at this point.
Yeah, no, we didn't have to set a date tonight. Section 9 gives us that flexibility to put it out there and set it when we think it would be appropriate.
Okay, so we will have a motion to delay both the town election and the town meeting.
Why don't we just do the town meeting first, and then we'll segue into the town election?
Okay, I'll move that we delay posting the warrant for town meeting scheduling it for April 6th until further action by the Board of Selectmen to reschedule it at a future date.
Yeah, if I could just, if you take a friendly amendment to the motion that pursuant to the powers the Board of Selectmen has under Chapter 39, Section 9. So we give a section.
Sure, I'll accept that.
Okay, motion made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
So then, with respect to the town election, I would move that the Board of Selectmen seek an immediate court order without posting any election warrant.
David?
Yeah, so I would say that the town election should be whenever the state election is. Under these circumstances, it makes no sense for the people in precincts 3, 4, and 5 to come out twice. So, and, I'm not sure that we need a motion to say that, but I would propose that we work to delay the state election and that we have the town election whenever the state election is. Right, so if we, whether it's a court action or whether the Secretary of State's willing to delay the state election by 2 months or whatever it is, that we just hold the town election on that same day.
What would be the ground rules, Nina, for that combination?
So at this point, if we're going the court order route, we can just request whatever relief we want from the court. So as I said, we can provide a date certain. I don't think in the past complaints we have done for weather-related emergencies, I don't know that we have provided a date certain. We've just because none of us know what the world is going to look like in 20 or 30 days. So I would just say, seek to postpone it and then work with the Secretary of State's office to figure out two things. Figure out when that can be held. And also, hopefully by that point, again, special legislation has been passed, which gives some flexibility, again, just to do this in the future by vote of the selectmen as opposed to needing to go back to court.
How did it get scheduled on the same day in the first place? Was that just coincidence, or does Galvin have timelines that he has to schedule a special election when somebody resigns, or
Yes, special elections
don't
have
know.
timelines. Yeah, they have timelines when the so many days once the seat is opened, and then there was the primary scheduled first.
I'm assuming he didn't pick March 31st just because that's the day of our local elections, but has anybody been in touch with Galvin's office to say, how are you going to react to this court filing, or how's he done, if other towns have filed it, what's he said?
Yeah, so we have not been in touch with him in his office on behalf of any of our individual towns yet to give notice. Again, before we would go to court seeking these orders, we would make sure that the Secretary of State's office has notice. My understanding is they have been focused on trying to get their own legislation passed to authorize the Secretary of State to postpone these elections. For a variety of political reasons, that's not gaining traction on Beacon Hill. So now I think they're kind of throwing their hands up and saying, look, unless you have a court order, you need to hold these elections. I don't know, I don't imagine that a state governmental office is going to oppose any postponement of gatherings and things like elections in the current environment. But again, we haven't specifically put that to the Secretary of State's office. I know that another one of my towns had an election this past weekend. They put a huge array of protocols in place to make sure that people were distanced and only a limited number of people were in the room at the same time. But then you get a line of people standing outside waiting to come in and trying to make sure they're appropriately spaced. I mean, just trying to hold an election in these circumstances is possible and has been successfully done last weekend, but again, the ground has shifted since last weekend as far as the number of people that are allowed to gather. So I can't fathom anyone requiring the town to hold an election if a town is asking for that relief.
Peter?
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
No,
Go ahead.
what was your sense up at the State House about the postponing elections?
We have been assured by the governor's legal counsel that who we are in close contact with, given our colleague Lon Povich, who recently held that office. He's in close contact with everyone there. We have, so we've been pumping Lon with a number of different proposals that we felt were important for our cities and towns. And we have been assured that the election legislation is on its way and a top priority, and that the permit tolling legislation likewise is on their radar screen. But the representatives and senators that we have talked to have not seen anything from the governor's office yet on those two initiatives. I am told folks on Beacon Hill are well aware that the elections issue is a huge concern. That's all I'll say on that.
Peter?
No, I spoke to Eva today, and she certainly is in favor of putting off the election. Half her poll workers have said we're not going to come. A lot of them are older. And I did talk to John. As Nina points out, there are other towns that have held elections. I think Bedford held an election, John said, a couple of days ago, and took various steps to try to prevent spread of the disease. But I don't think we should hold the election. I'm getting a lot of questions from other towns about this. One thing that comes up is if you move the election, the date for filing nomination papers is tied to the election. You have to file the nomination papers with the registrars to verify signatures 14 days before they have to be filed with the town clerk, which is 35 days before the election. So what I've been telling towns is if you move the election, you got to move the dates for filing, and I don't know if you've looked at that issue, but that's my understanding of it. So whether somebody else would want to pull papers and try to get them filed again is a good question, but there are other issues that come about when you move elections, but that's one that I've had to deal with. So, and it's fine. I mean, I still think we should move the election.
Well, the one time I can remember when a local election in Acton was postponed was in the 1997 town election, when we got hit with a 2-foot snowstorm the day before, and it was up in the air whether the election was going forward. You couldn't move, and then when the governor declared a state of emergency, the elections were postponed with it. They were postponed specifically for 2 weeks. There was no requirement that the election be reopened for additional candidates. So I would just assume that if the election is postponed, the same slate holds. There's no new candidates that would.
Okay, I mean, it's, again, we're in uncharted territory. So.
Do you have any, Nina, would you have any idea?
As Peter said, this is uncharted territory. That's not an issue that has been litigated in the past, and there is dispute amongst municipal practitioners on that point. And so I have not seen consensus on that point. My instinct is contrary to Peter's, that it would not reopen the papers for filing, but there are good arguments on both sides of that one. And that may be something that we ask for clarification on in the legislation, not just the ability to extend and delay and postpone the election, but be clear about what that means as far as campaigns.
So
Is that something that the board would like me to pursue legislatively?
I don't think so.
Well, just leave it alone as it is with no new entrants.
So we're trying to develop a motion on the March 31st election.
Right. I thought we were going to deal with we did town meeting, I guess.
Yeah, we did town
So we
meeting.
did the elections, yeah.
So this would be, so I would move that the Board of Selectmen seek an immediate court order without posting any election warrant to postpone the March 31 town election to a date to be determined.
Is there a second?
I'm not going to second that because I oppose that. I think the state election has to go first. I would vote against that because there's no reason to make people come out twice.
Well, I said to a date to be determined, which would allow the flexibility.
Right, and if Bill Galvin doesn't move the state election and the court order doesn't get issued against that, then the state election is going to happen on the 31st. I would prefer that we ask council to and town manager to work with other towns to ask the Secretary of State or seek a court order to move the state election, and if that gets moved, the town election follow.
I'm sorry, your motion was just to move the
Move the
town
town
election?
election. We have no authority to move the.
Well, Nina's saying that the towns would get together and file an action to move the state election.
I think that could be an additional motion. I wouldn't necessarily combine it together.
Just to be clear on the timing, we likely would bring both complaints to the emergency session at the same time. I can certainly make the point that it makes sense to deal with the state special election complaint first before dealing with the town election complaint. But we would likely, they're trying to limit access to the courts altogether. They're only open for emergency actions, so our proposal would be essentially we would be sending one partner in on behalf of a whole slew of towns to deal with a number of different complaints and motions at once. So I don't want folks to be under the impression that one day we would go in for the state and then a couple days later we would go in for the town. It would have to all be done likely on Friday.
So a question for John then. Do you think you'll pull the coalition of the 7 Middlesex 37th district towns together before the end of this week?
We've been in touch already today. None of the communities had a decision from their board as of today, which direction they're going to go, but I certainly could bring back the board's decision here tonight and encourage that work if that's what I'm directed to do.
Okay.
What's the consequence of that, Nina? Suppose 5 of us say go and 2 of us say no.
That's a question I would defer to Bill Galvin.
What's the best road to know when the state election will be and to schedule the town election on that same day?
I don't know. Well, at this point, the court order would just be asking to postpone the special state election and postpone the town election. We would not be recommending a date certain at that point.
So, John, can we have your motion and ask town council to do exactly what you said, but for both elections? with the understanding, and it doesn't have to be in the motion, but we, either in the
Okay,
motion or
sure.
separately, with the understanding that we don't want to have two elections. We don't want to expose all of our poll workers twice, and we don't want to expose the community twice. We don't want to have to make people come out twice. So,
So let me say it this way.
yeah, so if you just amend your motion to say both the Middlesex 37th and the town election, and I think council now understands at least my point of view.
So I would amend the motion that we seek an immediate court order without posting any election warrant to postpone the March 31 town election and the March 31 Middlesex 37th district special election to a date to be determined. Would that be satisfactory? Thank you.
Okay, motion made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Hooray.
Now we can start the agenda.
Well,
Thank
I
you.
think it may be short.
Yeah,
Could we just recess for a...
sure. Brief recess. So when do our terms end, Peter?
We don't know yet.
Oh, yeah. No, they were filed in February. Huh? Okay, can we reconvene?
Madam Chair, if I may make a point of order about the vote that was just taken. The concern that staff has raised in the town manager's office is the timing component with respect to the posting of the election. So typically the town election is posted in the town meeting warrant is posted 14 days before the annual town meeting, where technically the town meeting opens on the town election. That is today is the 14 days. We won't have an answer from the court. We expect an immediate answer from the court, but we obviously didn't go to court today. We plan on going on Friday. So the thought is there at least should be, a provisional posting of the town election so that all of the eggs are not in the court order basket. Such that if in the slim chance that the court does not grant our requested order to postpone the election, the town has complied with the charter and the bylaws by posting an election 14 days before town meeting opens.
Peter?
Yeah, let me just ask, do we send out if we were just going to do the election and the meeting is put off, would we send out to every voter a warrant for the town election itself? No. You don't, okay, that's not part of the warrant. Okay.
The election warrant gets posted at 6 locations around town, and they are ready. We discussed earlier today, and they're ready to post that this evening, and I think Mark and John have prepared for you all a separate election warrant, separate from the warrant, understanding the town meeting warrant, understanding that you may want to delay the town meeting separate from the election. I haven't seen that. I don't have a copy of that paperwork, but I understand it's in your packet.
Okay, so I'm going to amend our prior motion to add that we will post the election as required by the town charter by the end of tonight, but still authorize town council to seek postponing the election, both the state and the local election. That's what we did, right? Yeah, okay.
Just to be clear, if the board could, since the board voted on the past motion, if you could take the step of rescinding that vote and then a new motion as Peter described. I'm sorry, I know it's very technical and formal.
I move to rescind our prior vote about postponing the elections.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
New motion.
Then let's do it together. The Board of Selectmen moves to seek an immediate court order to postpone the March 31 town election and the March 31 Middlesex 37 state representative election to a date to be determined. And if you would pick up here, and the town will post the...
But in the interim, the town posts the election warrant to comply with the town charter.
For the 31st.
For the 31st, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay. Are we set? All right. West Acton Cultural District application.
This has been continued, but the individual asked to continue us to a future meeting.
Okay. Discuss annual and continue to review articles. Do we need to do that tonight?
I would be happy not to.
Okay. Yeah. Housing choice designation application, 2020 discussion.
So 2 years ago, the community was designated as a housing choice community, which is a special program through DHCD where communities that meet certain thresholds of best practices have access to grant funding. And we were fortunate to get a grant 2 years ago to $160,000 and we used that in collaboration with the Housing Authority to do sidewalks and a walkway and some driveway features at the affordable housing properties off Great Road. So it's a program that if in order to stay in it, you have to actually reapply every 2 years. So what's put before you is some of the materials that we'll be planning to submit as part of our reapplication. And as part of our reapplication, it's required that the Board of Selectmen vote to support it.
Is there a motion? This is a motion to apply for a grant?
No, it's a motion to seek application to be designated as a housing choice community.
David?
I would move that we support the application for Acton to be a housing choice community.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Option agreement with Acton Housing for the Main Street property.
Thank you. So Kelly Cronin, the Director of the Housing Authority, is actually, I believe, is here to participate in this conversation.
Hi, Kelly.
Virtually here. So I guess if she could be unmuted, if that's okay. Okay, so at the last town meeting, hi Kelly. At the last town meeting, the community voted to approve the proposal to take the existing 348 to 364 Main Street property, which currently holds Kennedy Landscaping, and the town acquired several years ago. And the town meeting approved a plan to work with the Housing Authority to create several affordable housing units for seniors there. And so in order for the Housing Authority to proceed with their development plans based on that vote, they need to secure rights to the land. And so this option agreement is something that we've been working with town council on, and the Housing Authority Board, I believe, has reviewed it initially. They gave us back some comments, and that is what I sent to the board last week, I believe, and may have been included in the packet. Since then, our council has reviewed it again and has further comments, which I can go through just to make sure that the concepts that are in here that you have, that I can get your input on as we finalize this draft.
I have one question from the Dog Park Committee.
Okay.
Does this include the total parcel?
So it's an option to purchase the entirety of Lot 3 in Parcel C, and it's an option to acquire a permanent utility easement for septic and temporary construction easements over Lot 1 and 4 and Parcel A. So it doesn't give them rights to use the entire parcel, but it gives them rights to have a permanent utility easement on the entirety of the rest of the parcel that they're not using.
I believe that's a septic system that they have easement for. Yeah.
Okay. David?
So I'm to kind of camp on to Joan's concern. Would be concerned that nothing in this agreement preclude access for a dog park should we want to do that on the other property later, including any driveways or parking or whatever that might be needed for the dog park.
It certainly wasn't structured in that way to prevent another use, but I think I'd have to double check the language exactly to make sure of that.
So can you all hear me? This is Kelly.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So our understanding was that the parcels to the left, if you're looking at the property, we would just have access for the easements to do the utilities. If the town wanted it to be passive open space, the way we had designed it when we submitted the application, we'd be perfectly happy to do that there, but we understand that the town, at town meeting, did say that the parcels that we would develop and have ownership of would be to the right of Isaac Davis Way, and that we would have the easement for the utilities on the other side, which wouldn't preclude future use.
Okay, thank you. David?
So, my concern here, I don't dispute what Kelly said, but the land use department has some concepts of how a dog park might work in that location that involves some access, and I just want to make sure that those are not precluded by this agreement. And, you know, that's it. You know, I just want to make sure that, you know, if there's access needed from Isaac Davis or access across the property or whatever, that there not be a problem. And I think the land use department has drawn up some concepts of how it could work, but I mean, they're not designs or anything. So there isn't like a final design or anything to judge, or even whether we would use this property for a dog park. But I just want to make sure that if we decide to use it, that there is not this option that doesn't cause us some problems.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify, the land use department didn't create concepts of what a dog park would look like. They were supporting the dog park committee who asked for some ideas. So the dog parks committee's concepts that our talented land use staff help bring to life.
Sure, but they did involve places where parking might go and where entrances might go and things like that.
And so Nina, I think, has more comments on the legal part of it.
So I haven't seen any of those plans, but as Kelly mentioned, as long as those plans utilize only Lot 1 and Lot A and Lot 4, which are the lots to the left of Isaac Davis Way, which is a dividing line between the lots, if carried forth to Main Street, then they would not be impacted by this agreement as long as the Acton Housing Authority had the utility access.
David, I've seen those drafts, and the dog park would not be on the Isaac Davis or north of that. So the two lower lots would not interfere.
The only thing that I know is that the septic system for the housing development and the dog park would overlap.
Right.
And so I just want to be clear that the septic system is on these other parcels.
Yes.
Then it's probably okay. I just am slightly concerned that there is a problem, but sounds okay.
Sorry, just to be clear, so the septic system, I believe, is designed to be on the parcels to the left of Isaac Davis Way.
Yes.
Okay.
The ones that are not part of this agreement, except there's an easement.
Correct.
So I think that given the postponements of other major decisions, I wanted to try to get this in good shape before town meeting, and you just bought us some more time to do that. So that's good. I think we can certainly review it for the specific concern you raised, but if you don't mind, I'd like to take through just a few of the other points so that we can have the board's input as we finalize this with the Housing Authority. One item is with regarding to the option period. The development of projects like this require several rounds of requests for funding through all the programs that they access federally and otherwise. And so we had initially put in a shorter time frame to get to closing, and they wanted to have it be December 31st, 2021, where they would have, by that point, a permit. So I just want to make sure that the board's comfortable with that timeline, where the parcel would sit as is, and they would, as part of this agreement, they'd be required to have a permit in hand by December 31st, or if the board agrees to extend that timeline mutually with the Housing Authority.
Peter?
I have a question for Kelly. Wouldn't it be in your interest to get control of the parcel earlier if you're looking for funding, rather than, I suppose if you have an option, that's enough control? Why would you not want to exercise your option earlier?
So we want to try to get the permit in this calendar year. We just don't know with everything that's going on that's going to happen. So we wanted to have the permit in hand, and it is our goal to have the permit in hand by November, so that we can go and apply to the state for the one-stop application. And we'd like to have this agreement signed and agreed to before the 31st. We're just asking that if we haven't met the conditions, we can get an extension for 2 years. When we applied to the committee for our project, we said it was going to take a minimum of 3 to 5 years to get financing. So we're not going to be able to pay for the project till we get the financing. So that's why we're asking to have the original option deadline be extended till the 31st, 2021.
And so just in addition to that, the extension period that Kelly mentioned, in the draft, it's written as between 1 and 2 years. So the Housing Authority, I believe, is looking for the option to extend for up to 2 years. We were looking, and the Housing Authority hasn't seen our latest draft, so we're thinking less time. But if there's a preference from the board or any feedback on that, please let us know. If you're comfortable with 2 years, or you'd prefer to stick with just a 1-year extension option. So if they don't get their permits in hand by December 31st, but they're on their way and they can demonstrate to you, you can extend it for a period afterwards. Would you like that period to be 1 year or 2 years? Or would you defer to council and me to work with them on it?
Yeah, I don't think we need to make that decision.
Okay, I'm just trying to get some feedback.
Just to pause for a minute, do folks understand the structure of the agreement, that there's an option period for them to get permitting before we would enter into a purchase and sale with a defined closing date? So right now, we're just negotiating the option for them to purchase the property. You know, if we sign this option and then the conditions are met, they get the permitting in hand, then they would go forward and we would close later when the financing came through. So it's structured a little bit differently than a normal just negotiation of a P&S.
Peter?
You know, driving by there tonight, it looks pretty good, actually. It's got nice grass growing on it. The town cleaned it up. So if the Housing Authority exercises their option and pays us the dollar for the property, I assume there's language in here. I mean, they're obviously, they have to maintain it to the condition it's in now, I assume. We maintain it until we turn it over, right?
Just to clarify, the purchase price outlined in the option agreement is $1 million. But yes, they
Okay,
would,
that's CPC money, but yeah, you're right.
So do you need a vote from us?
no, I don't need a vote. Well, if you're ready to vote, that'd be great, but
Madam Chair,
Got
Dean?
a question along those lines. So, in the meantime, I'm interested is what's going to happen with the existing tenant and the agreement that we've got with them and their rules of operation. I noticed it appears that they're getting ready to reopen for the spring. Is there any ability on the part of the town to renegotiate the conditions under which they're operating there?
We have an agreement with him that we'd give him, I think, 6 months' notice before we need him to get off the property, and we haven't done that at this point. And his agreement with the town does provide that he gives either a payment or in-kind services up to a certain level. I don't have that in front of me.
In addition, I thought more recently we went to a license with Kennedy as opposed to a lease, which provided with a shorter notice period. I can get you that information. I wasn't able to get online, so I have all of that here in my little electronic notebook that won't work. Otherwise, I could answer those questions for you. But we've been in constant contact with Kennedy's and their counsel. And I believe at this point it is only a license that is in place with them as opposed to a lease, which is a different legal obligation.
That started out as sort of a short-term agreement, and just seems like it's gone on ad infinitum. So I just want to make sure that there's going to be an end to it. Thank you.
Okay. We all set on that?
Unless you have any questions for me that you'd like me to address.
I think we're all set. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. I just want to also thank the town for including the Housing Authority in the coronavirus planning. We really appreciated it.
Good. Thank you. Okay, Kmart property.
I had prepared because I had gotten, quite a few questions as to the status of the parcel and the Stop and Shop's putting the parcel on the market. I had prepared a statement. I had sent it to John to review. I think you've been slammed, so I'm quite happy to put this off until our next meeting. It was our intention to combine on a statement, make the statement, send it to all boards and committees, and then make the statement again at town meeting. So I think if it goes off till our next meeting, that would be fine.
Okay. Family-friendly room for town meeting. Can we hold on this?
Well, yes, but if I could just give you a quick update.
Sure.
So, given the recommendation from the Town Meeting Improvement Committee and then the further recommendation from the board to put it forward, we met with the team last week, including some of the school folks that run the facility over there, and we came up with a pretty good idea, I think, for how to incorporate a family-friendly environment. So stay tuned, I guess, but it's going to be, we're going to use the overflow room concept and just make it a family-friendly overflow room. And if you want to go in there with your family, you can. If you want to go to the bigger room, you can. And we'll provide tables to sit around rather than the standard chair format.
Right.
So, I look forward to telling you more about it when we figure out when town meeting is.
Okay. Accept Tree City USA designation 2020 and Arbor Day proclamation. This is good news. This is very nice.
Yes, so our Public Works Department, Corey York, and the new tree warden, Ryan, has done a great job in working on this effort. And so we have before you a proclamation.
Which I shall read.
Would you like to read it? Oh, you have it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Whereas 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees. And whereas this holiday, called Arbor Day, was first absorbed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska, and whereas Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and the world, and whereas trees can reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil by wind and water, cut heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, produce life-giving oxygen, and provide habitat for wildlife. And whereas trees are a renewable resource, giving us paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless other wood products. And whereas trees in our city increase property values, enhance the economic vitality of business areas, and beautify our community. And whereas trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and spiritual renewal. Now therefore, we, the Board of Selectmen of the Town of Acton, do hereby proclaim April 22nd, 2020 as Arbor Day in the Town of Acton, and we urge all citizens to celebrate Arbor Day and to support efforts to protect our trees and woodlands. And further, we urge all citizens to plant trees to gladden the heart and promote the well-being of this and future generations.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Hooray, this is wonderful. And I will sign this.
Nina, thank you very much.
Here, Peter. I'm sorry. You want to sign this? Got it? Now, Veteran Service approval of regional district with Boxborough for 3 years.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Just wanted to announce the good news that James McCrae's excellent work as the district director for the Acton and Boxborough Veterans District was approved by the state. They approved us last year on a one-year trial basis, and after seeing the great work that he did for both communities, they've approved it now for a 3-year period. We've already established the proposed budget for Boxborough, so they're prepared to contribute again next year, and it seems to be working really well. So just wanted to mention that, and great job, James.
Well, congratulations, that's excellent. Now, the announcement of the Colonel Francis Faulkner Volunteers of the Year. Peter, this is your baby?
Yeah, I had asked that we each make our announcements of our candidates so we can say a little bit about why we made the decision to recognize them. So I nominated Bob Whittlesey of the Housing Authority. Bob is a true American hero, having survived the Battle of the Bulge and gone on to become a nationally known expert in affordable housing issues. Has worked with the Housing Authority for many years, continues to sit on the Housing Authority board at the age of 96. 98, okay. The Housing Authority recognized him by dedicating the new development on Sachem Way as the Robert Whittlesey housing development. So I think he is well deserving of the honor.
David?
I'm not prepared for this.
Okay. Dean?
Well, I had several great candidates, one of whom had already received the award. I have one other candidate in mind that I've dealt with, but he's also involved with several other boards, so I don't want to step on anybody's toes. But I would nominate Joe Will.
Yeah, I tried to do that.
He has, okay, then there's two in a row that So I have no other candidates in mind
Okay.
at this point.
John?
I nominate Derek Chin, who's a member of planning. Sorry. I proudly nominate Derek Chin, who's been a member of the planning board for 10 years. He's its current chair. He's been a longtime member of the Economic Development Committee and the Kelly's Corner Steering Committee, and a most deserving candidate.
And I've nominated Carolyn Kilpatrick, who's on the Historic District Committee. She's been in town for many years and has served the town very well, not only in this capacity, but in other organizations in the town. So they'll be recognized at the event at Narrow Park, if we have it.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I thought there was a deadline for people to make the nomination, but I didn't realize that not everybody had gotten there yet. Hopefully we'll allow you folks to make your presentation at a future meeting.
Okay, back to tough things. Sewer.
Can you call the meeting of the sewer commissioners, please?
Oh, do we have to adjourn the selectmen's meeting? No, all right, well, I call this group together as the sewer commissioners.
So thank you, sewer commissioners. The reason that this is on the agenda is that a few meetings ago, you acted to change the sewer privilege fee from just over $12,000 to $30,000. And I'm just seeking some clarification on the how to implement that policy with projects that are currently or were currently or are currently in the pipeline of development and permitting, I guess more specifically. A specific concern was raised by a gentleman from 66 Maple Street who I thought was going to join us, but I'm not sure if he's here remotely. But that's the reason why it's on the agenda.
These are folks who've already pulled building permits, I assume?
In this case, the gentleman I'm referring to received his permit from the planning board, I believe, a week or two afterwards, after the decision of the sewer commissioners to change. Yeah, Rich, is it? I think we have a participant to speak to this, if that would be helpful.
Yes.
Okay, you're on.
Okay. Tara Frederickson, I think it was a comment from before that I was still in line for, but I will comment that I think that it's a bad precedent to set to have somebody not adhere to a change that the Board of Selectmen put in place just because it happens to be close to, or 1 week close or 1 month close. Well, somebody will say 6 months. There was an important case, casinos, where the state decided to put a question on the ballot, and the casinos cried foul that the state had changed, it might change the regulation in the middle of the application process. Well, the SJC ruled that it's a cost of doing business to not know when the laws will change, and that basically too bad. And so I concur with that finding and feel that all applicants should adhere to the law, and what you've passed is the law. So I hope that you hold it. Thank you.
Thank you. David? Is there anyone else?
We still have a person waiting, I believe.
Hello? Are we on?
Hello, yes,
Oh, okay, you can hear me, correct?
yes.
Okay, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for hearing me in the middle of all this chaos right now. I appreciate it. So I am one of the owners of 66 Maple Street. My partner unfortunately couldn't be online. His mother passed, so he sends his regards to everybody. So we have been in the process of getting this permitted for quite some time now and dealing with the planning board and the historic commission and whatnot. And I was just curious as to where we stood as far as this SOAR privilege fee was approved pretty much right around the same time as we had all our approvals put in place. So I didn't know if we were going to have to pay the $30,000 or get the other fee, the $12,000 fee. That's the question that I had for the town manager a couple weeks ago.
David?
Well, I would propose that the change we made a few meetings back be in effect. I mean, for all projects going forward. I think if, similar to what Tara said, if we make an exception in one case, how many cases are we making an exception for? And I think it's an issue of fairness for the current ratepayers in the district, right? The people who are being added to the district are not paying their fair share. And as we've indicated a number of times in the upcoming rate study, that we're going to need some upgrades to the treatment plant and things like that. Everybody's got to pay their fair share of that. It's not fair, frankly, to let people in with 20-year-old dollars, which is the setting the price that we set 20 years ago. And also there's the issue going forward. There are other projects in the pipeline. They have to pay their fair share as well. And I think if someone asks nicely and we get an exception in one place, why is it different in another place? So we have to treat everybody the same and also fairly. So to me, it's fair on both sides of the fence.
Dean?
I'd concur with Mr. Martin. Now, I ran into a similar situation when I was renovating my house a few years ago. We thought we had all of the costs tied down, and then partway through the review process, the building code changed, and substantial additional costs were accrued. That's life. I wasn't happy about it, but that's what happened. We get caught in the middle of it. Same situation. I feel bad for the gentleman, but I think the board drew a line in the sand a few weeks ago that was the date, and I think we should stick with it. So I'll agree with Mr. Martin.
Further discussion?
Am I still on with you guys, or?
Let me just ask a question, if I may. It's a question of when the new sewer privilege fee begins.
Yes,
I don't think we ever pinned that down.
we said immediately. So,
okay, so when we say immediately, does that mean for applications to come in, or does that include applications that are in process of permitting?
well, I think that's why the town manager brought that in front of us today to figure out what we thought about this, right?
Yes.
And so this project that we're discussing today, and again, I feel a little bad for the gentleman, but the permit process was completed after our change. There are a number of projects that already have work in progress, and I don't think we should be making exceptions for them. And it's an absolute issue of fairness to the ratepayers in the district and to projects that follow on this one. So that's what we said at the time. I believe that we should stick to it.
So immediately means anything that's in process?
Well, anything that was where the permitting process was completed after the change.
The permitting process was completed after that change. Okay, so it's after the change as well as in process.
Yes, if they'd already completed their permitting process and they know they building permit and they could, we're going, that's fine. But then they could continue. But this project was not in that state, and there are other projects that are not in that state.
Oh, so anything where the permitting process was completed, they would go by the $12,000 rate?
Yes, I don't know of any cases like that, but yes.
Okay, but anything else that was, in process?
Yes, that would be what
Would be subject.
That's what I believe we did.
Peter?
No, I was just going to say, I would think it would apply to when they hook up to the sewer. I mean, I don't think that a sewer connection is part of a building permit, is it? That's up to the owner to decide whether they want to connect up or not. That's when they get charged the money, isn't it? When they connect up? I don't know. Maybe there are no projects that, have gotten permits but haven't connected up yet. But I would think it would apply when you're going to go to connect up and the town says, okay, you owe us $30,000.
So I changed. There was a project that was the 184 Main Street project, which was already underway at the time we made. They already was digging going on there. We also actually, I think at the meeting before them, allowed them to pay at the time that they hooked up, but that project was already done. So we already said that, and I objected a little bit at the time, but that's what we did. So that project is allowed to pay because they completed the project was already underway. The old rate at hookup time, actually at occupancy. But I think going forward, anything that where the permitting process was completed after this change, the new rate takes effect. And I'm really sorry that we took 20 years to do this. It should have been done incrementally, but that's water over the darn.
Or into the pipe?
Yeah.
All right, any further discussion on this?
Do you need a motion or anything, or you just need a sense of the?
I think if I get the sense that you meant immediately going forward, then I'm comfortable with that.
Great.
Okay. So consent items. Approve meeting minutes, February 24th, 2020. 15, accept gift for $4,800.
Are we done with that?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's it, huh? No discussion. All right.
Thank you. Accept gift for $4,800 from Friends of Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, Inc. for removal of trees at the East Acton Village Green site. 16, accept gift Recreation Department for $193.90 from various donors for funding a new recreational facility and playground at Jones Field. 17, committee appointment Elena De Silva, full member, 53 River Street Master Plan Special Committee, term to expire at completion of task. 18, one-day alcoholic beverage license, Apple Valley Catholic Community, St. Elizabeth's of Hungary, March 28th, 2020. Is this within the no more than 25 people? March 28th, that's coming up.
Well, I suppose you could grant the license, but they can't have any more than 25 people there.
So should we hold the last two and vote on the others and then discuss that?
Okay. So a motion for 14 through 17?
I move that we adopt consent items 14 through 17 inclusive.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then the one-day alcoholic Thrive Dental Company, great unit, Unit 1.
They've got listed 125 to 150 people.
Where is this?
The one on the back page.
One day, what is it?
March 24th. We can't grant
March
these
28th, yeah.
licenses.
Where does it say the number of people?
Well, I'm online, so it's got the application, if you're online.
Oh, I didn't see that, okay.
It's got
They said
the
125 people.
125 to 150.
Okay, well,
We can't grant
that.
these.
So it'd probably be canceled? Do we want to not grant the license? So in the actions the Board of Health took yesterday, they didn't actually prohibit those things, right? They recommended those things, and also the governor has recommended, right? The governor's level is 25 people, not 10, and so are they prohibited? I don't know. I know I'm not actually sure. The governor ordered 25 people, no gatherings of 25 people or more.
I don't think we could sanction gatherings of above 100, above 25.
No, I don't think so either. So maybe we should not approve these.
Yeah, I'll move that we deny that application and ask the town manager to communicate to the applicants that the reason we did that was because we,
Just a thought, to continue it, to potentially have you reconsider it when they figure out when they want to postpone, so they don't have to reapply.
Yeah.
I mean, they may never reapply. I
So
guess.
both of these, we'll hold on these.
For 18 and 19.
Right, I move to take no action on consent items 18 and 19.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
let me, can I just amend that? Maybe we waive, what's it, $25 to apply for one of these or something? Can we waive the fee if they reapply?
I'll let you know if you can't.
Okay,
If you decide to do so, I'll let you know.
okay. All right, we're denying it right now, though. Okay.
Is there any other business to come before the
when do we want to
meeting?
meet again?
Tomorrow?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I certainly would appreciate a meeting so that John can keep us up to date on, the full board up to date on what's happening, how it's playing out, what we might have to anticipate in the future, what's working, what glitches are coming up that we have to deal with or whatever. So the town has to deal with. So I talked to John today. He was suggesting Friday or after the Board of Health meets, or we could meet next Monday, I suppose. But the town meeting's off, so we ought to. Well, I'm suggesting we schedule more regular meetings throughout the crisis, basically.
Would you prefer us, John, on Friday or Monday?
I think we could do.
I would prefer Monday.
Yeah, I think Nina mentioned she's going to try to file that paperwork, and then we'll have something to report back to you by Monday. We may not have something to report back to you on Friday.
All right, so
Actually, is Tuesday easier for you and staff because you're here anyway? I mean, does it matter?
Sure. Yeah, Monday or Tuesday would work for me.
There's a previously scheduled, a regularly scheduled Board of Health meeting on Monday, whether they have one Thursday and then Monday they might. And so maybe we should do our meeting next Tuesday. We're all just going to be at home, so it doesn't really matter.
That's okay with me. I'm around.
do you want to do it during the day or?
During the day is harder for me.
Okay, then we'll do it at night. So Tuesday, 7 o'clock?
Sure.
Tuesday, 7.
Okay, meeting is adjourned until next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Same place, same setup.
Before we actually adjourn, we could do the meeting purely virtual, which may be easier to do. The school committee meetings starting Thursday are 100% virtual. Nobody's coming in.
I like
I'll be here.
I like seeing you guys.
Okay, fine. We're all 6 feet apart.
John was a genius ordering these.
Yes.
I noticed you already signed it already. This is on the transfer piece of paper. You have to sign it again. On the first.